This is an Asus ROG Ally, and conceptually at least, it's a really cool product. What you have here is basically a handheld gaming PC. It's significantly more powerful than a Steam Deck, Nintendo Switch, or really any other handheld on the market. As long as you manage your expectations around settings and frame rates, you can basically enjoy any game on the go, but just not for very long. You see, this is my ROG Ally, and I've had it for a little while now, and what I've learned is that it's definitely got some big weak points, and if I'm being brutally honest, it's failed to live up to my expectations. But fear not, because with a little bit of ingenuity and a little bit of elbow grease, I think we can fix all of those. That's right, today we are going to void my warranty, wish me luck, and we are going to build the ROG Ally Pro. Packed inside this little handheld powerhouse is an 8-core Ryzen APU with an integrated Radeon 780M GPU. It also has 16 gigabytes of DDR5 memory, and in my opinion, its weakest spec, 512 gigabytes of internal NVMe storage. So the first mod I did here was just replacing that with a 1 terabyte drive from Sabrin. And you can see that this is a special compact 30mm drive. I actually missed an opportunity to install a larger full-size drive here, but we'll talk more about that later. First, I wanted to solve an issue that has plagued the Ally since its launch. It cooks SD cards. Underneath this main heatsink is a micro SD card slot, and as you may have guessed, based on its location, it gets really hot. So in order to fix that, I borrowed a product from the automotive world. This is fiberglass and aluminum heat shielding, and it comes in simple self-adhesive sheets. A few layers of it should keep your memory card safe from the heat above. I'm actually kind of surprised Asus doesn't do this from the factory. Once I knew that my SD card wouldn't self-immolate, I felt much more comfortable about adding another 512 gigabytes of storage. Next, I want to tackle a different type of capacity. This is the battery pack that comes with the ROG Ally. It doesn't say anywhere on it, but I'm pretty sure it's about 45 watt hours, and that equates to about an hour to an hour and a half of battery life, which for me is just not quite enough. So if you look over here in this cardboard box, I actually have a replacement battery for one of Asus's gaming laptop. Same voltage, but about twice the capacity of the one that comes in the Ally. And the nice thing is the battery connector just plugs right into it, and the battery management software should play nicely together. In its current configuration, there was no way that this battery was going to fit inside the Ally. This left me with only one choice. I had to fold it. You see, the battery is made up of 4 separate cells arranged around a battery management PCB. So the first thing I did was cover that PCB in electrical tape to avoid any accidental shorts, and then I carefully folded the cells into a single stack. Big thanks to allymods.com, by the way. I read their article about this mod and it kicked off the inspiration for this whole project. Now, obviously the battery pack is pretty exposed like this, but don't worry because we're going to reinforce it later in the video. First though, while we're in the kitchen, I think this is a great opportunity to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, AG1. I am the butt of the joke in my close circle of friends because of my poor diet. I've been known to partake in fast food on a pretty regular basis, but I've been making a concerted effort to clean up my diet lately, and a big part of that is AG1. It's a foundational nutrition supplement that supports whole body health. Every morning, I wake up, mix some AG1 into a little bit of ice cold water, and then use it to start my day. Each scoop contains 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients, which is nice because now I know that I'm getting the full spectrum of vitamins and minerals that support my immune system. Stuff that I was probably missing in the past or would have had to have sourced from multiple other supplements. I've been taking AG1 for the past couple of weeks now, and I've noticed a pretty dramatic increase in my energy levels and concentration levels, which is great when you're trying to finish a YouTube video on a tight deadline. And it's also packed with prebiotics, probiotics, and plant-based enzymes that help to support gut health. But that might be a little bit too intimate to talk about in a YouTube video. So if AG1 sounds like something that you might be interested in, head over to drinkag1.com/ZachBuilds or click the link down in the video description. You'll get a free 1-year supply of AG1 vitamin D3 and K2, plus 5 AG1 travel packs with your first purchase of AG1. All right, now let's get back to building the ROG Ally Pro. So but I figured since we already have it disassembled, this might be a good time to do another little side project. I want to upgrade the cooling of the Ally so that we can crank the performance up to 10. And also, upgrading the cooling is going to affect how we cut the back of the device, so it just makes sense to do that first. From the factory, the Ally's heatsink comes painted black, which admittedly makes it look pretty cool, but it's gonna get in the way of what we're about to do. So the first thing I did was just use a buffing wheel to remove that paint. Then I wanted to add some more heat pipes. These copper tubes are filled with a liquid that very effectively transports heat from high temperature zones to low temperature zones. You can see the original heatsink is actually just a single long flat heat pipe, but I wanted to utilize the third dimension. So I marked out a couple of rough indexing lines on the tubes and then took them over to my bench vise where I was going to attempt to bend them. In order to make the copper a little softer and easier to bend, I heated it up. But I had to be very careful because if you boil the liquid inside of the heat pipe, they'll pop and send shrapnel flying right into your eyes. And also, you have to be careful that you don't kink the tubes when you're bending them because, well, then they won't work anymore. Thankfully, I rode the line and managed to get the job done, but it wouldn't be the last time that I risked popping these heat pipes. So now that we have our two heat pipes bent, they're going to wick heat away from the CPU and take it somewhere. And that somewhere is going to be this copper M.2 heatsink like I used in my gaming phone video. It's gonna go a little something like that and radiate out the backside of the Ally. But there is a problem. So in my gaming phone video, I just brazed a bunch of copper together, but that won't really work here because these heat pipes, like I said before, will pop if they get too hot. That being said, I think I've come up with a solution. In this little bag right here, I have some, damn my fat fingers. I have some low temperature soldering paste. So this stuff will melt and then solidify at a much lower temperature, and hopefully it's somewhere below the popping point of these heat pipes. Unlike conventional solid solder, this stuff comes as a very viscous paste. And if you were to look at it very closely under a microscope, you would see that it's actually just a bunch of little solder balls suspended in a flux. Its lower melting point comes courtesy of the introduction of bismuth into the alloy and puts it right in the Goldilocks zone for this project. Its melting point is low enough that it can be used to braze these heat pipes together without them popping, yet it's high enough that it can easily withstand the operating temperatures of the heatsink. That being said, there was still a dance to be done here. I used very short bursts of the torch to melt the solder and regularly checked my temperatures with a laser thermometer to avoid things getting too hot. The last step was joining the heat pipes to the heat sink directly above the CPU. This is the highest temperature point in the whole system, so it's where they'll be the most effective. They'll transport heat up to the copper block, where it will then be carried away by another mod that we're gonna do a little bit later. Before installing this new and, in my opinion, very cool looking heatsink, let's talk about thermal interfaces. So from the factory, the Ally's heatsink comes pre-applied with this little thermal pad here. And this might actually be Honeywell PTM7950, which is a very effective phase-changing thermal compound. Basically, when it heats up, it melts and fills the gap between the heatsink and the CPU and effectively transfers heat between the two of them. However, there is one product on the market that's supposed to be better than this. Inside this little syringe here, we quite literally have a liquid metal. And this, as far as I know, is the most thermally conductive interface on the market. However, it's really tricky to work with and there are quite a few pitfalls. So before we even get into this, we had to do a little bit of preparation on the Ally. Using some 99% isopropyl alcohol, I removed the old thermal pad on both the heatsink and on the actual die of the APU, which revealed its very cool mirrored finish. Now, the problem with liquid metal is that it's not only thermally conductive, but it's also electrically conductive. So if any of it leaks out, it can short surrounding components. In order to prevent that, I applied a very generous helping of conformal coating. This stuff solidifies into a soft rubberish skin that's electrically insulated. By applying it the whole way around the die, I effectively created a sealed chamber that prevents the liquid metal from leaking out, which is obviously going to be important in a handheld gaming machine. The liquid metal itself is notoriously hard to use and less is more here, so rather than squirting it directly onto the die, I opted to just put a little bit onto this piece of plastic and then transfer it over using a cotton swab. From there, you're just trying to paint as little as possible onto both of your mating surfaces. It doesn't need to dry or cure, so as soon as you're done your application, you can just reinstall the heatsink. And then, to pick up a thread from earlier in the video, I used this heat shrink wrap to add a layer of protection to the battery. This is basically the same stuff as heat shrink tubing that you'd use to insulate wires, except it's bigger so that it can accommodate a whole battery. So now our battery pack is gonna sit something like that right there. And now we need to figure out how much of the back plate we need to hack out. To cut into the back of the Ally, I grabbed one of my favorite home renovation tools, the oscillating multi-tool. One of the nice things about these saws is that you can easily plunge them right into the middle of whatever you're working on. The cut was a bit rough, but in all honesty, it didn't need to be super accurate. We'll make it look nice later. For now, I just hacked away at the plastic until my new heatsink and battery pack could poke right out the back of the Ally. Okay. We just have one last little thing that I want to do here in the shop today. This is the cable that connects the battery to the motherboard. And it doesn't really work with our new larger battery because the port moves over too far. So we're going to have to cut into this guy and extend it ever so slightly. The easiest way to extend a harness like this is to just cut it in half and then add in a couple more inches of wire. It is important to note though that the wire you add should be the same gauge, or potentially even a bit thicker so that you don't add any additional resistance into the system. But outside of that, just twist the wires together, solder the joints to reinforce them, and then add some of the aforementioned heat shrink tubing for insulation. So I'm sure many of you are looking at the back of this and thinking, what the heck are we gonna do with this big hole here? Well, in order to fix that, we are going to head back to my office. We're going to do some CAD modeling and a little bit of 3D printing to clean this up a little bit. And also, I want to make a dock for this thing, so we still got a lot of fun stuff to do. The first thing that I think we're going to need is what I like to call the battery bridge. This is just a piece of plastic that's going to sit inside of the Ally and support the battery above all the internals and give it somewhere nice to rest. Once I had my CAD model fully dialed in, well, I just 3D printed it. So this is the piece here, and I've actually made this out of 100% ABS, and I printed it at 100% infill. So not only is this very strong and rigid, although it still does have a little bit of flex to it, which is nice, it's also very heat resistant, which is important because, well, it's gonna be inside the Ally where it might get a little bit warm. Inside the Ally shell, there are these 4 little indents that used to support the old battery. So I figured, why not reuse those? And I made 4 legs on the bottom of my battery bridge that slot right into them. Obviously, nobody wants their game console to explode while they're using it. Because the battery sits in such close proximity to the new raised heatsink, I thought it would be prudent to wrap its exposed edge in some more of that heat shielding from earlier. Then, in order to connect the battery to the bridge, I used some heavy-duty double-sided tape. The next thing that we have to do is cover up the back of the Ally. So I have designed a new back plate here, as you can see. This was considerably harder to model than the bridge, but I think it's gonna be worth it. It features improved air intakes, obviously more room for the battery, and also I reused a lot of the stock mounting points, so it should bolt directly to the Ally pretty easily. And again, I've opted to print this in 100% ABS, so not only should it be nice and impact resistant, but it should also be thermally stable. Everything needed to be millimeter accurate, so the first thing I did was install the 4 machine screws that screwed into the stock mounting points. Then I broke out the drill and started drilling some new holes. Okay, just kidding. At first, I just made light little marks with the drill bit so that I knew where the holes needed to go, and then I disassembled the Ally and drilled the whole way through. Once I had the holes done, I reattached the rear cover using some shorter machine screws that threaded into nuts on the other side, and then I CA glued those nuts in place so that the rear battery cover can be removed separately from the rear shell if need be. There we go. Now that that back cover's in place, everything's all buttoned up, and this feels great in the hands. Can easily still reach the rear buttons, no problem. Doesn't really get in the way of your hands. And as an added bonus, now that it's got that bigger back on it, you can set it upright like this and play it from a distance like a Nintendo Switch. At this point, we could jump right into the thermal and performance testing. However, if you'd indulge me, I'd like to do one last thing on this project. I want to build a custom dock for this machine. Rather than giving you a digital tour of it, I've actually already got all the pieces printed out, so let's check them out that way and assemble it and see how it all fits together. In terms of material, basically this whole dock is printed in carbon fiber reinforced PETG. Similar to the ABS, it's more heat resistant than PLA, and it's also got this really cool kind of matte effect to it. I just love the way this stuff looks, and it is gonna be plenty strong for a video game console dock. The first piece we have here is the main body, and it's actually keyed so that when the Ally slots into it, it just kind of locks there in place. And then if you look around back, it has this cutout here that is the perfect size for a fan, and it's ducted towards the intake vents on the back side of the Ally. In order to install the fan, all we have to do is slide its 2 power wires through this little hole that I've created, and then the fan pressure fits in here with its little rubber corners. In order to protect the blades from the user, or the user from the blades, I have this cover that just slots right over the fan and is keyed so that it slots right into the dock itself. This next piece is just a little bit of shameless branding. It's a faceplate for the dock. But in order to create it, I actually utilized some really cool technology. So you see, this is made with 2 different types of plastic. The base is a white PLA, and then the raised lettering is a carbon fiber reinforced PLA. And my Bamboo Lab X1 Carbon 3D printer did this for me automatically. So at a certain point, it just paused the print, switched the filament, and then continued the print. And that happens right where the lettering starts to raise. One of the easiest and best ways that I found to bond 3D printed parts is to just use CA glue. It sets very quickly, and it seems to hold really well. So with that out of the way, we had to answer a very important question. How are we going to control this fan? Because you might not want it running all the time. You might want to just put the ally in here to charge sometimes. Well, for situations like that, I got this little switch. So we're just going to thread it through and it just pressure fits in here. So now we need to find a way to power our fan. And in order to do that, I got this PCB. And funny story about this PCB, it actually started out its life in a Steam Deck dock that I bought off of Amazon. I assumed that it would be made out of plastic, but when I got it, it was made out of aluminum, which is, you know, nice and high quality, but in order to get this out of there, I had to get a bit destructive. Safety glasses. Come on, give me the PCB. There we go. Okay, well that's what I needed. But hey, we got it now, so let me show you how it all gets hooked up. Powering this fan was not going to be a straightforward affair, so I had to get a bit creative. I connected the ground wire from the fan back to the switch and then taped down all the wires into this recessed area I created in the bottom of the dock. Then, with the PCB in place, I was ready to steal some power. You see, one trick I learned is that USB ports almost always have a 5-volt pin that you can just steal power from. So, using my multimeter, I figured out which pin it was on the back side of the port, and then very carefully soldered the positive side of the fan to it. This was precise work, but with a little bit of patience, it's easier than it looks. And the ground wire was even easier because I could just solder it to one of the grounding legs on the outside of the port. And the last piece of the puzzle is just this simple bottom plate that should click in like that. And all of our ports are cut out perfectly in the back of it. So now we just plug in this USB-C power delivery port. The ally slots in like so. And then this guy wraps up and clicks into the top. And now if we throw this switch here, we can engage the turbocharging mode. Yeah, look at that. This thing actually moves a ridiculous amount of air. You can even feel it sucking in air here. Wow, that's crazy. So I took a little bit of time and I did some in-depth testing on the ally, and the results are kind of mixed. Let's start with thermals because I think that is a bright spot. When you're in handheld mode, you're basically looking at a 15 to 20 degree drop in temperatures across the board, no matter what you're doing. And then when you put it in the dock, it's more like a 30 degree drop. So naturally, the next thing I did was test the performance. And here's where things take a bit of a turn, because basically across the board, you were looking at a 2 to 3% jump in performance, which is kind of like the margin for error on these tests. So as it turns out, the ally is power constrained, not thermally constrained. Obviously that's a little bit disappointing, but you guys know me, I was not going to let that be the end of the story. As it turns out, there is a way to lift the power limits of the ally. I was able to use a custom BIOS called Smokeless in order to raise the power limits of the ally up to 54 watts, nearly doubling what it can do from the factory. After tinkering in the BIOS for a little bit and also installing a program called Handheld Companion, I was now rocking a fully unconstrained ally, and I was ready to lay down some serious performance numbers. Or at least that's what I thought. Turns out 54 watts the APU isn't good for much other than just generating a lot more heat. Even in the dock with the fan going, the ally was hanging out right around that 95 degree thermal cutoff, and performance saw like a 5 to 10% uplift, and that's with almost double the energy use. I don't know what else to say here other than that diminishing returns are a real bitch. You see, processors have a sweet spot where they get the most performance per watt. And if you push beyond that limit, well, the performance increases are incremental and energy use just goes exponential. So now let's talk about battery life. Or actually, maybe we should jump right into the post-mortem analysis because I feel like I've been living a lie throughout this entire video. Okay, maybe that's a bit dramatic, but here's what happened. When I first installed the bigger battery, everything was great. I was getting double the battery life across the board, and actually maybe even a bit more than that. It was fantastic and everything that I wanted. But there was a proverbial fly in the ointment. You see, I am cheap, so I ordered a third-party battery for this project. It was $80 versus the $150 that Asus wanted for a genuine one. In the 2 weeks or so that it's taken me to make this video, well, that battery has since started acting all wonky and now it won't even take a charge. So now I am back to the original stock battery in here. And after talking to some other members of the Ally modding scene, that's entirely to be expected. If you want to guarantee that the big battery mod is going to work 100%, well then you need to use a first-party Asus battery. So lesson learned, I've ordered one, it's in the mail, and when it arrives, I will just swap it in here. Next, I missed an opportunity to get some more storage in here. They make these really cool right angle M.2 adapters that allow you to run 80mm NVMe drive. How cool would this thing be if it had 4 terabytes of storage in it? Also, I think Hall effect sticks would have been a fun upgrade, but currently they don't work very well. You see, the triggers are also Hall effects, so the magnets crosstalk between them and create all sorts of interference. I think overall, if I had to do this whole project over again, knowing what I know now, I would just do the big battery mod, I'd build the dock, and then I would call it a life. The extra cooling performance doesn't really add much given how well optimized this machine is. And don't sleep on the dock, by the way. You can just plop the Ally down into it and it basically becomes a full desktop computer. Hell, if I wanted to, I could edit this entire 4K video footage on the Ally in the dock. Oh, and then I almost forgot my favorite new use case for this thing. I'm gonna use it like a video game console down in my living room. I'll just put it in my coffee table, connect it to my AV receiver, and now I've got a gaming PC connected to my TV. And if it's not powerful enough for the latest AAA games at 4K, well then I have a solution, one that's actually free. I can use a program called Moonlight, render the games on my much more powerful PC upstairs, and then stream them to the Ally. And honestly, I've used it a little bit and it works really well. You would not know that you are streaming the games. And on that note, I think we're done here. So in my next video, hopefully I will be showing off my new modernized Nintendo 64, or if that's not done yet, well then I might just do some DIY Dolby Atmos speakers. Either way, you're gonna wanna get subscribed so you don't miss those, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.